Okay, well, here we are again. Another week, another Doug. Or another Xmen 97 review and discussion. Ooh boy, you dare criticize this on the X, and you get all kinds of people coming at you. So, for the sake of keeping it civil, let's get into this most recent episode titled Bright Eyes. Let's get to the plot breakdown. After the events of the Genosha Massacre in Episode 5, the X-Men are mourning. We open with a funeral for Gambit as Nightcrawler gives his eulogy. It is a heartfelt moment, but if not for the show being tied to the 92 series, I would have no idea who these characters are in this show. Rogue is absent from the funeral service. We cut to Rogue assaulting an army base with an underground installation where General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross... No, not that one. No, not that one. Not that one either. Yeah, that one is hiding. See? Marvel connections. Clap. Please clap. After Ross comments that even the Hulk couldn't break into the bunker, Rogue just does it, and mentions something about her father saying prison was easier to break into than out of. Okay, whatever. More inconsistent power sets in this show. Rogue is on a warpath to find Henry Gyrick and Bolivar Trask, the originators of the Sentinel program. Ross reveals the location of Gyrick after being threatened off-screen. Kelly and Cyclops talk. We get racism allegory. Rogue is then confronted by Captain America, Steve Rogers himself. Or, this is who these showrunners want Captain America to be. Is that the hopeful, honest man who believes in personal liberty to a fault? The hero that represents an entire generation of men who fought and died for their country and came home to rebuild it. The hero who helped build and hold together the first 3 phases of the MCU by being tough, capable, charming, and a beacon of hope in the darkness. The hero who became an outlaw from the U.S. government because he was unwilling to bend from his principles of personal liberty and freedom. A man who, as Tony Stark puts it,
a super soldier, living legend who kind of lives up to the legend.
In this show, he's an uptight, hamstrung stooge of the U.S. government who answers directly to the president and is unwilling to help Rogue because it sends a message. This is after Rogue calls him America's top cop, who shares that Gyrick was broken out of protective custody by shady government operators and taken to a safe house in Mexico. They make it clear that Captain America sympathizes with mutants, but will not publicly support them due to optics. So, the hero whose shield graces hundreds of thousands of t-shirts, lunchboxes, backpacks, and other various memorabilia that children all over the world wear proudly, then has that shield taken from him by Rogue. This is after he tells her that his hands are tied since the safe house is out of the country. And of course, Rogue tells him that if his hands are tied, he won't be needing this, and throws his shield over a mountain range. And that's it for Captain America. Rogue finds Henry Gyrick, uses her powers to forcibly violate Gyrick's mind and rip the information on where Bolivar Trask is hiding from him. Again, this show is based on a children's cartoon from the 90s. Meanwhile, the rest of the X-Men go to Genosha. We then go to Sunspot and Jubilee, who have the most on-the-nose dialogue, where Sunspot says that Genosha is the byproduct of what happens when we shove it in their faces. Sunspot agrees to out himself as a mutant if Jubilee comes with him. Beast suddenly decides that the X-Men have been begging for humans' tolerance and has a self-righteous monologue. Jean has a dramatic moment of psychic impulses in Genosha so that she can have another soap opera moment with Cyclops. We find out that Emma Frost has survived and gained her diamond form, just like in the new X-Men comics these writers clearly wanted to adapt, instead of the Chris Claremont X-Men the original show was based on. So, maybe they'll have Cyclops cheat with her as well. The X-Men then receive a distress signal from Trask, who tells them it was sinister. We get hammy dialogue from Morph and Wolverine, who they remember exist in this show after Episode 3. Sunspot and Jubilee have the talk with Sunspot's mother. She makes it clear she has always known he was a mutant, but says that he still cannot be public as a mutant due to their business holdings and shareholders being skittish about mutants. Essentially, you're gay, keep it private, because mutant now just means gay. Nightcrawler wakes up Rogue in Mexico City, and they talk about Rogue's loss. Rogue's acting is, more on that later. And then we get, dun dun dun, our main villain reveal. It's Bastion, the classic X-Men character who appeared in the famous episodes. Actually, Bastion was never in the 92 animated series, so unless you read one of the most unpopular events in 90s comics, you have no idea who this is. But on we go! The X-Men go to meet with Trask at the UN building, where they find a lobby full of dead men. Morph, who can never be not sassy, makes very humorous observations. They find more dead soldiers with the OZT logo. They find Trask himself about to commit suicide on top of the building. Even though Trask called them to save him, he stands on the edge of the building and gives them vague information about what's going on. According to Trask, OZT is placing dominoes. He claims Sinister is building new Sentinels based on super advanced technology. Then Trask, who called the X-Men there to help him, tries to jump off of the roof. And in a moment that is laughably bad, Rogue catches him demanding more information. And when he won't provide it, she drops him anyway. The show plays the obligatory moaning voices to tell you how tragic this moment is. Morph and Nightcrawler fret, "Is this who we are now?" And Rogue goes on an impassioned rant that is about as convincing as a drag show in McAllister State Prison. So after Rogue's impassioned speech, it all gets reversed anyway because it's revealed that Trask is a new form of hybrid Sentinel, who then fights the X-Men. He picks them off one by one until Cable just arrives and throws a future grenade that blows him up. Jean realizes that Cable is Madeline's son Nathan, providing further proof that this show is only tangentially connected to the original series, where she realized that already. Cable tells the X-Men that he needs their help to prevent a villain from destroying the future. We then cut to Sinister, who is meeting with our big villain in a bright pink room of monitors. Sinister is criticizing the attack on Genosha, and Bastion claims that he evolved as a villain, while Sinister and the other classic villains did not. Again, even though Bastion was never in the original series, so he had nothing to evolve from. But anyway, we then cut to a creepy scene with Magneto, who is revealed to be alive. Yay, Magneto's still here. But now he is held hostage in a backwoods shack by Bastion, who is apparently going to operate on him under a swinging light bulb with a straight razor. Why would a human-android hybrid do this? What possible purpose would it serve? Tune in next week to find out. Maybe, unless the show just flips to a new narrative as it has been doing. Okay, let's start the review, and I'll start with the positives here. I liked the action scene with the human Sentinel Trask. I did feel like it had actual stakes, and there was some good visceral action going on. That is continually the one area that this show seems to do pretty well. Now, depending on where they go with him, I like that they brought Bastion into this as the villain, that they brought in someone new. I was really underwhelmed with what they did with Sinister, so I do appreciate the instinct to take a fairly overlooked villain and bring him up in terms of threat level. Bastion was never a particularly popular character, so aside from the writers needing to tell us how they have made him better than Sinister, I'm at least interested to see where it goes. The creepy visuals accompanying Bastion were also interesting. The Purple People Eater song coming on. I get it, he's spooky. Pretty good job, show. His murder barbershop thing with Magneto makes no real sense, but hey, creepy scene. Very horror movie-esque. Alright, and that kind of closes us out for positives. On to the criticisms, and I will try to keep this as focused as possible. The show is still a mishmash of random moments with no narrative build earning them. It's clipping through one set piece to another and only vaguely holding them together. The writers seem to think that by hiding Bastion's image in and among other moments throughout the first 6 episodes, that this was enough in terms of setup. Again, dissenting viewpoint here. This show is using established characters from a pre-existing narrative, doing no intrinsic character work in and of itself, and then throwing them in a blender of X-Men lore from the comics. And okay, dear viewers, it's time for some lore. So, who is Bastion? I think we need to define that going forward. Well, Bastion was created by writer Scott Lobdell, who took over writing duties on the Uncanny X-Men in the early 90s after the departure of long-term X-Men scribe and main architect of the modern X-Men, Chris Claremont. Lobdell's run is often controversial due to his decent character work but overall weak narratives. Lobdell got the job on the book because the supervising editor, Bob Harris, was in a bit of a bind and Scott Lobdell was literally walking past his door when he was desperate for a writer. Harris had allowed a bit of a chaotic behind-the-scenes debacle to occur under his tenure on one of the most successful series Marvel Comics had ever had. In the late 80s, X-Men were at their peak. Claremont had been helming the series for almost 14 years by that point, and although some of his better plotlines, such as the Phoenix Saga, were reversed to allow for books like X-Factor, he had a good working relationship with the creative artist and writer husband and wife duo, Walter and Louise Simonson, that helmed that book. Claremont, a long-term plotter, was riding high. His X-Men were going in new, challenging directions. He was building in storylines and plots that would further develop and build to new, satisfying story arcs and climaxes. But then, a new era arose at Marvel. The superstar artists arrived. This era brought in such names as Todd McFarlane, who would revolutionize the look of Spider-Man and went on to create Spawn. It brought in Eric Larson and Rob Liefeld, and of course, Jim Lee. The Uncanny X-Men books have been illustrated by artist Mark Silvestri for most of the late 80s and into 1990, but then Lee arrived. And his art style brought a whole new generation to the books. X-Men was selling better than ever, but there was a problem. See, Lee believed himself to be more than just an artist and wanted to share story and plotting duties on the books. Marvel had always had a very free-flow method when it came to writing and illustrating. Illustrators were often given the freedom to create whatever happened on the page as they saw fit without direct involvement from the writer, as long as it adhered to the overall narrative and plotting. But things got out of hand with Harris and Lee. See, Bob Harris, the editor-in-chief, was more of a numbers man. Interviews and details of the time paint an almost cartoonish executive with no real idea or interest in the stories being told. Kids liked the art of Jim Lee and Wilts Portacio, who was illustrating X-Factor at the time. Harris decided to give creative control almost completely to the artist. So he reduced Chris Claremont to essentially being the guy who wrote the words on top of whatever random things Jim Lee decided to draw that month. When Harris decided he was going to bring back Xavier, who Claremont had long written out of the books, Claremont quit. Simonson, over on X-Factor, the creator of Apocalypse and the architect of one of my personal favorite story arcs, which turned the somewhat boring Angel into the deadly Archangel, also left. And then disaster struck. And all of those artists Marvel and Harris had put all of their faith in suddenly got together and left Marvel due to the poor royalty setup the company had structured at the time. They left to create Image Comics, and, well, that's a story for another time. So, without a main X-Men writer, several notable writers at the time turned Harris down. Harris turned to Lobdell, who himself says he was in the right place at the right time. Lobdell became the main writer of Uncanny X-Men starting with issue number 286 in 1992. Lobdell had the unenviable task of A, making sense of the dangling plot lines left after Claremont's departure, such as Gambit's origin, who Mr. Sinister was, and so on, and B, maintaining the high sales the books had achieved at the height of the Lee Claremont era. It could be argued he achieved the latter, but only barely maintained the former. Lobdell, a writer who claims he never believed in long-term plotting, simply wrote as he went, following whatever characters seemed fit for a given narrative. This could be strong, as in the Age of Apocalypse or Zero Tolerance event, as with Iceman, or poor along the lines of the Onslaught event. Lobdell's answer to the sales issue was the now dreaded words, crossover event. A crossover event is simply a major occurrence that affects most of or all of the stories in a shared universe. It had been done with Claremont on the Mutant Massacre storyline and the Inferno books, but it was used sparingly. It was an event. Under Lobdell, it was simply one event going to the next. So there was the Executioner's Song, the Phalanx Covenant, Fatal Attraction, Age of Apocalypse, Onslaught, and Operation Zero Tolerance. Of those stories, Age of Apocalypse is the most praised, Onslaught the most derided, and Operation Zero Tolerance the most forgettable. Basically following the awful Onslaught storyline, wherein the psyches of Professor Xavier and Magneto merged to create a whatever Onslaught was, Lobdell created Bastion. Bastion was the fusion of Nimrod, a sentinel from the Days of Future Past timeline, and Master Mold that was thrown through the Siege Perilous along with Rogue in Uncanny X-Men number 247. What is the Siege Perilous, you may ask? Or probably didn't. But I'm going to fill you in on this last part of obscure X-Men lore anyway. See, originally appearing in the Mighty World of Marvel number 13, featuring Captain Britain, Brian Braddock, the brother of X-Men's Psylocke, before she was body-swapped with an Asian assassin, Jim Lee's writing for you. It was a large portal to an alternate Earth through which the body of Merlin, yeah, that Merlin, was sent by a character named Roma. Who is Roma? Well, trying to keep this from becoming a Russian nesting doll of characters and storylines as much as possible, Roma is the daughter of Merlin and is the Omniversal Guardian, charged with the safety and protection of the Omniverse. Not the multiverse, the Omniverse, which I'm not going to define here. Basically, in issue number 229 of Uncanny X-Men, a magical lady gave the X-Men a magical portal that they could use as an escape hatch to give them rest. The concept here being that this was a portal tied to the idea of chivalric achievement and Arthurian legend, and that after earning such a reward through their heroic deeds, the X-Men had essentially an escape hatch through which, if they walked, they would be reborn with new memories, lives, and identities. They would forget who they were, where they came from, and have the anonymity and release from the constant struggle of being an X-Man that they might crave. However, if a person who passed through the portal was unworthy, they would be punished and get what they deserved. It's kind of an Ark of the Covenant idea. So this device had been used to end a large era in Claremont's run on the X-Men when they were stationed in Australia. Psylocke, the classic version of the character, convinces the team to walk through it to save them from being wiped out by the Reavers. Rogue had previously gone into it with Nimrod and Master Mold and would come back out later mostly unchanged. Lee again. And then the Siege Perilous went out of the story until later writers needed it.
But it's an easy fix. One line of dialogue. Thank God we invented the, whatever device.
Cut forward to Lobdell's run, and he needs a new villain for the X-Men following the not well-received Onslaught arc. Lobdell is under the big mandate to keep sales up. Sales are down, the X-Men animated series is ended, and the big push during that era was to create more mutants for more trading cards and more action figure sales. So Lobdell invents the next villain as a human sentinel hybrid who believes he was a real man named Sebastian Gilberti. He is introduced in Uncanny X-Men number 333 in typical shadowy villain style, and slowly comes to the forefront over the Onslaught arc. Bastion is shown throughout the Onslaught arc, building up human-mutant friction and convincing high-ranking officials in the government to allow his initiative, Operation Zero Tolerance, to go forward. In Operation Zero Tolerance, basically, Bastion convinces the president to back him in going to war on mutants with his new hybrid sentinels. The hybrid sentinels are humans who have had futuristic technology grafted into them. What Bastion actually does during the arc is very little. It's pretty common in superhero comics for the primary villain to take a back seat and plot from the shadows while his minions do his bidding, but man, Bastion takes it to a whole new level. Basically, he uses his hybrid sentinels to storm the X-Mansion, captures the primary group of the X-Men, hacks the Cerebro computer to glean as much insider information as he can on the X-Men, and then he kind of just stands around and plots things while Iceman runs around gathering a ragtag bunch of mutants. The main X-Men escape, as they always do, and then Senator Kelly convinces the president that Bastion has gone too far and they arrest him. That's really it. The only notable things that came about due to Zero Tolerance was the creation of Bastion, who would not have his true background revealed until much later, and then the idea of futuristic technology being grafted into humans to create sleeper agents. There's some cool visuals, and as a big fan of Iceman, he gets some great moments in the run. Other than that, it's a retread of earlier, better X-Men stories. So what does this have to do with a 30-minute episode of a cartoon show? Well, first it's important to point out that just like with the birth of Nathan Summers, the Friends of Humanity, the reemergence of Master Mold, the disappearance of Xavier, the loss of Storm's powers, the clone of Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor and the Goblin Queen, the affair of Rogue and Magneto, Mr. Sinister, the techno-organic virus infection of Baby Nathan, taking Baby Nathan to the future, the rescue and exodus of the Morlocks, the elevation of Genosha to the UN, the Gala in Genosha, Cyclops' psychic cheating, Jean feeling lost, the decimation of Genosha, the death of Magneto, the introduction of Deathbird, the introduction of Lilandra, Ronan? The Shi'ar crisis with Xavier, the return of Storm's powers, the death of Gambit, the funeral of Gambit, Captain America, Rogue on a revenge tour, the reveal of Bastion and human hybrid sentinels, and finally, the reveal that Magneto is still alive. Good God, it's exhausting just listening all of that. That is an insane amount of plots, storylines, and events jammed into 7 episodes, let alone introducing a new character like Bastion with no previous mention in the show that this one has stapled itself to so that it can further avoid any actual attempts at narrative. So, the point, dear viewer, in all of that history and all of that background, is that this show is at it again. But on a positive side, I will say I like the idea of taking a potentially interesting villain like Bastion with a cool look and bringing him up to the big leagues. I think there is some real potential there if the show can just slow down and explore it. Other issues with the narrative flow come in with Rogue. Basically, at this point, I have no idea who Rogue is. She was barely in the first 2 episodes, beyond being catty with Gambit in episode 1, and then having a rushed reunion with Magneto in episode 2. She was barely in episodes 3 or 4, and only came to the forefront in episode 5 with that awful Magneto plotline, where she spent the whole episode telling Gambit she was going to give things a shot with Magneto before deciding, after Gambit had already left, that Magneto wasn't right for her. So this new raging rogue who's attacking military bases and trying to kill people. Okay, I guess that's in character for her, but I truly have no idea who her character is. On top of that, it's hard to garner sympathy for a character that was willfully cheating and flaunting her physical relationship with Magneto in front of the character she now claims was her man. The point being, there is work you can do with this character. Like, say, mine her guilt over making that choice in front of Gambit and never telling him she chose him. But the show isn't doing that. It won't slow down enough for that. So instead, we get Rogue being righteously vengeful and are supposed to cheer her on. Moving on, Cable still presents a huge narrative reset button, and I'm very curious to see how far they will go with that. As far as this show being connected to the 92 series, I have come to some terms on that. I suppose these reviews are my own way of moving through the stages of grief and circling around acceptance that this is what they did. They being Disney. But the former showrunner, Beau DeMayo, clearly wanted to tell the new X-Men storyline written by Grant Morrison. Next week, I'll dive into that since it is clearly the structure and moral focus that this writing team is driving towards. But they couldn't just create a new series and risk building an audience on only the strength of their writing. A new narrative? With only their names behind it? You must be crazy. No, that would take courage in a company that had any other play besides acquire property with a big nostalgia-based fan community and then strip mine that property for all it's worth while pandering to the woke community and our own in-house agenda. Problem is, no one would have watched that cartoon. Oh, a few hardcore X-Men fans might have, but not many would have stuck around once the writing level of the show kicked in. Ah, but you connect it to a beloved children's cartoon from the 90s that brought in an entire generation of fans and cemented the brand as one of the most iconic in pop culture? Well, now you've got something. You don't need to do any actual real work at all. You don't need to write actual characters or build them up. Nope. You just jump straight into your broken narrative, and then, the real genius, then you start shifting those characters. In some cases, you barely even wait through the first episode. You change them to what you, the subpar writer that you are, wanted to have them be all along. You have them act in ways you always fantasized about the X-Men behaving. And if people have a problem with it, ist and phobes labels. Classic Disney pattern. And that leads me finally to Captain America appearing in this show. I had an interaction on social media earlier where more than 2 people referred to him as a bootlicker. And yes, he is written particularly weak in this show. And that goes right along with these writers. See, they are so desperate to prove how edgy they are that they think this is good writing. They want to take one of the most inspiring characters from the MCU and make him a weak-willed joke. I want to remind anyone that buys into this take on Captain America of a few things. First, while an imaginary character, he is representative of a time in our country when young men did everything they could to serve, fight for, and protect our country. He's a symbol of freedom, yes, but what does that mean? It means that he's a character who, in his animated, comics, and live-action appearances, has always stood up for doing the right thing and protecting individuals, not systems. Second, I keep a Captain America shield I got from my wife one Christmas on my wall at school in my art classroom. Any kid that walks into that room recognizes and loves that shield. Captain America has moved beyond just the movies and the shows. He is something that all kids can recognize. Third and finally, Captain America is a character that means a great many things to a great many fans, and these wannabe, edgy writers think that tearing down a well-loved character to prove how clever they are will somehow make the character they're writing better. It doesn't. If you want proof of that, I would point you to the scene in this episode where Rogue forcefully holds onto Henry Gyrick's head as he screams in horror and pain. As she's doing this show's version of a hero shouts, "Quit fighting me!" So, dear viewer, I leave you for this week with this. I miss heroes being heroic. I really do. The cartoons I grew up with, yeah, they could be hokey and corny and melodramatic, but the good guys did good things and saved people. They were something to aspire to that any child could grasp. That's why we bought the action figures and read the comics. That's why I drew Captain America this week. He's a hero I can show kids and know they'll take the right message from. The Xmen in this show are not. And here, dear viewer, I will end this week's review and critique. If you enjoyed the video, I thank you for watching this far. If you hated it, well, then you really must have liked the artwork. Either way, I thank you for your time. If you want to see other videos in this series, they should be appearing on the screen. Coming up soon are video reviews of Fallout, my Captain Marvel pitch, and a full series critical review of True Detective Season 4. Until next time, let me know the hero you most looked up to as a kid. Who inspired you? Down in the comments below. And with that, I say, maximum effort.